Hi, my name is Shubham Takkar. I am from Smart System Hub, and in this today's video, I will explain you how consumer can get data from the provider via our manufacturing X learn and explore environment. So basically, we are using the open source environment from the TractorSX etc, and I will show you some technical detail like how provider can share his data to the consumer. So first of all, I will start with one sequence diagram. So from this sequence diagram, you can see there are mainly two main part like a provider as well as the consumer. So from the left hand side, we can start with provider, and on the right hand side, we have like a consumer part. So to share the data, in the beginning, provider have to perform some technical steps like he have to create a asset, then also have to make some policies, as well as he have to create a contract definition. So based on this stuff, consumer can get this data, and then the consumer side, he can start initial with catalog request. So with the help of catalog request, he can see the every assets which provider send it to him, and then in the next step in the EDRS, he can select any particular asset like which information he want to need now. So he can select any particular asset and get the data. So when consumer making the EDRS, at that time the contract negotiation as well as the contract agreement it started. And if contract agreement it succeeded, then it transfer to the next step. So the next step is like he got the transfer process ID, and based on this he can finally get this data which provider said with him. I will also show you one more detailed information directly from the TractorSX EDC side. So here is the standard documentation from the TractorSX EDC, which they call as like a management API walkthrough. In this document, they described every steps like how user can create an asset, how to create a policy, then how to create a contract definition and everything, and also some further steps followed from the consumer side. This explained here everything in detail, but no worries, this is more a technical way, but I will show you the information via one technical management API walkthrough example. Yeah. So basically here I will explain you in detail every steps which we seen in TractorSX etc side. So basically, first step it's like to create asset. And first of all, I am starting with the provider side. So from the provider side, first we will create the asset. So to create the asset, first of all, we need one provider URL. So no worries, we can provide this provider URL as well as the consumer URL, and also we need some XAPI key like as authentication to execute this URL, which we can provide you as part of learn and explore environment from the smart system app. For today's video, we already prepared this stuff, so I will just go you the detailed explanation of how provider can share his data to the consumer. But for this URL stuff and for other technical stuff, you can also contact us, or we will also cover this in our next video. Yeah. So as I mentioned, to create asset, user have to use this URL, provider URL, and also followed by this endpoint to create asset. So user have to use a post request with this endpoint and also the XAPI key in the header. And then he have to use this kind of context in the body. So here we are using normal JSON body, and I will start by step. So the first step it's like a context. So for the context we are right now using just like a empty to creating the asset, but in next step I will also explain you which kind of context we can use in some example. As we are creating the asset from here, so in the type I just wrote it like a asset, and we also have to select a asset. Yeah, the main interesting part is the ID field. So in the ID field, I wrote it right now like energy minus data minus P1. So this is the unique ID which we consider as our asset ID. Please keep in mind like we have to use any unique ID here. I am trying to sharing right now the energy data to my consumer. So that's why I just wrote it like energy minus data minus v1. But you can share, you can use anyone as you like. Like an example, if you want to share like a temperature data, then maybe you can just wrote it like temperature minus data. If you want to share like pressure data, then you can also use like a pressure minus data. Yeah. And then in the properties I use like a description, and description is just like some free of words, like uh, it's easy to for you as well as for the consumer, like what is the inside this asset and everything. So I'm just wrote it like sharing energy data to the data space. Then in the data address, we are using a type, like now it's like data address, and also the type it's like a HTTP data. Right now, we are sharing the HTTP data, and for this example, we are explaining you how can we share the HTTP data. So that's why I mentioned like a HTTP data. But in normal case, you can also share other kind of data. If you have like data stored in Amazon S3 or maybe like in Azure cloud, then you can also share this kind of data into the data space. And we will cover this information in our upcoming videos, but for this whole video we will only cover the HTTP type data. Then the another main important part, it's like a base URL, and here I wrote up one URL. So the base URL means like provider have to provide one API endpoint where his data is located. So this endpoint is mostly available via publicly, and right now this endpoint it's not secured with any mechanism. But if you have like your endpoint it's secured with like OAuth 2 mechanism, then you can also use that kind of endpoint. For that we just have to provide the OAuth 2 client ID here, and we have to store the OAuth 2 client secret inside the Hashicop vault. And we are also providing the central vault to the every our user, so they can add their secret directly inside the secrets there. But for this video, this endpoint is openly available right now, and it's have not any secured logic. I can also show you like which kind of information inside this endpoint. So inside this endpoint we have this kind of information like current time, as well as current temperature, as well as what was the temperature yesterday, as well as what is the temperature today. And so this kind of information here, and also some power related information. So why consumer need this kind of data from the provider? Just an example, you are in the factory and you want to working in like carbon footprint example, and you want to continuously monitor the voltage or energy of your system. Then consumer just calling the API every time, and he can see the values directly from here, and then he can perform some steps. So this is an just one example, like which kind of use case we can use with our data space. Yeah, so after complete everything, we just have to click on send button, and the API call is performing, and now we see 200 OK in the response. And we also see this kind of JSON response in the body. And here we can also see the ID, it's like energy minus data minus v1, which we already provide here in the body. And we can also see this kind of information like time related information, when this asset was created and everything. Yeah, so now in the next step, we will go to the create a usage policy. So the usage policy, which means like provider can define some kind of criteria here. Like he can decide how long he want to share this data to the consumer. Maybe just like 1 week or 2 week, or might be like anytime. So he can define this kind of criteria in the usage policy. For the moment I just didn't define anything. I will also explain you later in the whole body part. So again, to create a usage policy, he have to use this provider URL, as well as the followed by this endpoint, particularly for the policy definition. And he also have to use the XAPI key in the header, and he have to use like a post as a request, and then again like a JSON body. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, like we can also define some kind of context. So in this example, I defined this kind of context. You can also define this kind of context here. In the type, we are creating the policy. So we have to use like a policy definition. And then at ID, it's again a unique ID, which you can use for like usage policy. So for this example, I'm using the energy minus data minus V1 as an asset, and then I just added like a minus usage minus policy. So I this is my unique ID for the usage policy. And in the type, I just use like a set because I mentioned I don't want to make any restriction here. So consumer can use this policy like whenever he want to use. And then finally, when I'm clicking on the send button, I'm again getting the 200 OK. I am also able to see this kind of response here. Again, I can able to see the ID which we used in the body and also time related information. Yeah, so our usage policy is created. Now we have to create a access policy. Yeah, so basically the access policy means like here provider can decide to whom he want to share this data. Like how can provider can decide particularly this consumer can get this data. So we are using right now the BPN number logic. Again, this BPN number is already created by us and we can provide also to you. So right now we already created this BPN number for provider as well as for the consumer. So we are just directly using here to create a access policy. Again, he have to use a provider URL and followed by the this endpoint. And again, he have to provide the XAPI key in the header, and then he have to use a post as a request, and he can define this kind of stuff in the body. Again, I defined some context here. Then I also defined unique ID for the access policy. So in usage policy, I use like a usage policy, but in access policy, I just wrote it like a access policy. And it's also starting with my asset ID. So I can track this usage policy belongs to, or like this access policy belongs to which asset. So it's easy for me, but you can select any unique ID here. Yeah. Then in policy type, I again use like a type as a set. Then in permission, I use like action as a use. And as I mentioned, in we are using the BPN number logic here. So in the constraint, I use like in left operand, it's like a business partner number. And then I use like this is the my consumer BPN number. So this is like I provided here. Just an example, you if you don't want to use like a business partner number logic, then the other option it's like a dismantle credential stuff. So the dismantle credential we can define when we are creating the credentials and everything. It's not part of this video, but I will explain you in the upcoming videos. Yeah, and then I can just click on the send button, and again you will able to see like a 200 as a OK. And I'm also able to see this kind of response. Here I'm able to see the ID which I already defined in the body. So now my access policy is also created, and now provider want to create a contract definition. So the contract definition which have the information like access policy, usage policy, as well as the asset. So basically provider making the whole particular one contract with this three information. To create a contract definition, again, we have to use this provider URL and followed by this contract definition endpoint. And again, here to provide the XAPI key in the header, and we have to use a post request. And again, we have to define this JSON body. In context, I again leave it's like empty. And now again in the ID, we have to provide a one unique ID here. So for this example, I just wrote it like uh, my asset name and then followed by minus contract minus definition. As we are creating the contract definition, so at type I have to select like a contract definition, and then I have to use like access policy, contract policy which we created previously, like my usage policy and my access policy here. And then as I mentioned, we are also using the asset stuff, so we are to use this asset selector here, and then I just have to assign my assets here. and then I just have to click on the send button, and then basically with the help of this my contract definition is created. You can also see in the response again like a 200 okay, and also the contract definition ID it's here. Yeah, so until here we followed the all steps from the provider side. Now we will switch to the consumer side. And as I mentioned previously when I was explaining via sequence diagram from the consumer side, the first step it's like a catalog request. So yeah, for the catalog request, here we have to use our consumer URL, and it's followed by this endpoint for the catalog request. And again, we have to use XAPI key in the header, and also we have to use like a post as a request, and we can define this JSON body here. Again, I define this type of context here, and as we are mentioned, like we are sharing the HTTP data. So in the protocol, we are using like data space protocol HTTP. And the now the important part is like counterparty address. So again here we have to provide like a counterparty address, which means like we have to use our provider DSP endpoint here, and we also have to use one VPN number. This is the VPN number from the provider side. So consumer can make catalog request to any provider, but for this example our provider it's like a SSH minus provider, and his VPN number it's this. So we are using this information here, but in future might be possible like multiple providers add his data with multiple consumer, and multiple consumer getting the data from the multiple provider. So we just have to switch the information here. Yeah, and then I just have to click on the send button. It will take maybe 1 or 2 minutes, because as I mentioned earlier, whenever we are making catalog request from the consumer side, we are getting the all information which provider said with this particular consumer. Just an example here in the ID we can see like a initial check. So this is the ID of like asset. So provider is also sharing the initial check data to the SSH consumer. But right now for this video our focus is like our asset ID it's like energy minus data minus v1. So for this video we are just focusing on this one. So as previously we created this asset ID, so now we will just focus here. So we can see the asset ID here, then also the type as policy ID and everything. But also make sure this ID it's very important for us, because we need this ID in the next step. This is we can consider as like a offer ID. So I'm just copying this ID from here, and you can also see some other kind of information inside this response like a BPN number. So this is the BPN number of the consumer and everything, and you can see also some other kind of information. Yeah, now we will go to the EDRS step, and as I mentioned, for us the most important part is this offer ID. So I'm just this is my previous one, but I'm removing this one and using the latest one which we seen from the previous step. Yeah. So to make ADRS, again we have to use this consumer URL followed by this ADRS endpoint. Again we have to provide the XAPI key in the header, and again we have to use post as a request. We can define this kind of stuff in the context. In the type we just have to make a contract request. In the previous version of TractorSX EDC, there are two separate steps like a contract negotiation and the contract agreement. But in the latest version, we just have to use like a ADRS, which covered the both together like a contract negotiation and contract request. So that's why in the type we just using like a contract request. And again, we have to provide a counterparty address, DSP address. So here I'm providing the provider DSP URL. Again, we are using the protocol. It's like data space protocol HTTP. In the policy, I already mentioned this is our offer ID, which we got from the catalog request, and our assigner it's like a provider, and we already seen this SE6. It's like our provider BPN. And again, we in permission we have to use like our consumer BPN number. This is the same logic which we use in the access policy. So this is our consumer BPN number, and at the end we have to define in our asset ID in target field. So this is the our asset ID. And now we just have to click on the send button, and at this moment we again see like a 200 as a okay. Also we got this random ID, and also we got some information like when it's created and everything. Yeah, when we hit this API endpoint, at that time, two steps performed in the backend, like contract negotiation is started, like a consumer send the contract negotiation, and then provider accept this negotiation if everything is work fine, and then he send a agreement. And also there are two tokens stored in the Hesiko vault, but it's like a just for the confirmation, and it's like a backend part. Now we will go to the next step. It's like a ADRS request. So ADRS request is just calling from the consumer side, and when we are making the ADRS request, at the time we will get a transfer process ID, because our contract negotiation is successfully completed. We also had like a contract agreement. Now we will get just a transfer process ID. To make a ADRS request, again we are using this consumer URL, and it's followed by this endpoint, and also we are using the post as a request, also XAPI key in the header, and this kind of JSON body. So this is normal like context part. Here in the type we are just calling some query, so it's like a query spec, and in the filter expression we can using this part because we are just calling the transfer process ID of particular asset. So this is the our asset ID, and then I'm clicking on the send button, and then we are getting this kind of response. It's like a 200 okay, and again we are getting one random ID, and here you can see some kind of information like our provider ID in terms of BPN. So I already mentioned this SA6, our provider BPN number. We can also see the assetment ID. So this is our asset ID. We are also able to see the agreement ID, transfer process ID, and everything. For us, for the moment, the most important part it's like a transfer process ID. So I'm copying the transfer process ID from here, which we will need in the next step. And for the information, we can also see like a contract negotiation ID here. Yeah. And now for the transfer process, we again have to use consumer URL here, and then it's followed by this endpoint. And as I mentioned, I need my transfer process ID here. So this is our previous transfer process ID. So I'm erasing it and putting the new transfer process ID which we got from the EDRS request. And to hitting this endpoint, we don't need any part in the body part. We just need the XAPI key in the header, and we are calling the get as a request, and then I'm just clicking on the send. When I'm clicking on the send from here, we are getting many kind of information in the response with 200 okay. So our type ports like a data address, flow type, endpoint type, and some reference endpoint. Also our type ports like HTTP data, but the most important part it's like endpoint. So this is the endpoint which consumer can see, and he have to use this endpoint to get the final data. And also he have to use this authorization token from here, and for the information, this authorization token is only valid for like 300 seconds. So after every 300 seconds you just have to click on here, and the new authorization token will be generated from here. So first of all we have to copy the endpoint, and then we just have to create a one new get request, and we just have to paste the endpoint here. And then now I'm copying the authorization key from here, and which I have to use here in the authorization in the headers. So I'm just pasting the authorization key here, and now if I click on the send, yeah, then I will able to see the final data. So you can see like the data which I already show you in the browser. So this is the data from the provider which he said with the consumer, like this kind of energy information, like a yesterday, today, power related information, voltage related information, current, and everything. Yeah. So this is the technical information like how consumer can data from the provider via data space. Yeah. So if you have any further question or if you still want to learn in detail like how you can use our manufacturing X learn and explore environment, so we can help you. We will happy to guide you. We can also provide the connectors and some stuff to you, so you don't have to spend any time for creating the identities or like creating the URL for provider and consumer and also like a BPN number and this kind of stuff. We can provide this whole infrastructure to you and you just have to bring your provider API endpoint and you can share this data to the consumer. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this helps you. Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye bye.